Waterford rally. A couple of other very interesting stories here in the front of the Sunday Times sports section. Lingard in disaster gaffe as Manchester United lose again. This is essentially Paul Scholes breaking ranks on DAZN, where he paraphrased what Jesse Lingard told him, referring to the dressing room at Manchester United as a disaster. He says, Jesse probably wouldn't mind me saying that he called it a disaster, but I'd say Jesse Lingard probably does mind quite a bit Paul Scholes saying that. We will be getting into that in much more detail in just a few moments. The other story loosely linked with Manchester United is that Manchester United legend Roy Keane is interested in taking over at Hibs. So he's emerged as a potential surprise successor to Sean Maloney, who was sacked last week as Hibernian manager. Again, we'll come back to that in just a moment. So that's the back of the Sunday Times, or the front of their sports section. The Sunday World leads with Manchester United. United top of the flops. Rangnick admits top 4 spot gone as Ten Hag faces huge task. And meanwhile, looking ahead to the Merseyside derby today, Klopp, we're on for 4. Pool boss out to bash Everton today. The Sun on Sunday goes with 4 gone conclusion. Rangnick gives up on Champions League bid. Meanwhile, City's hero Gabriel set to leave Etihad. This is a story that emerged earlier in the week that Gabriel Jesus could be on the way out. Arsenal amongst the clubs being linked with Gabriel Jesus. Obviously played amazingly well yesterday for City, and feeling the lynch now is their headline on Waterford against Limerick. Ian Lynch pulling up an early hamstring injury in that game last night. The Sunday Mirror leads with damned United. Angry Rangnick set to name and shame in player report. Ralph says top 4 is over for us, as Max says big issues here, and Jurgen says show us respect. He says that the team may not get the respect they deserve if they fail to turn their brilliance into trophies. The Irish Mail on Sunday then, totally rotten is their back page headline of Manchester United. McTominay's damning admission about United as they are humbled again, and Limerick show the grit of champions is their headline on Limerick 30 points, Waterford 221. And it is those two stories that dominate finally on the front page of the Irish, or the Sunday Independent sports section. United's dressing room is a disaster. Scholes reveals Lingard admission as a crisis deepens, and Limerick stand tall is the headline there, with a photograph of Sean Finn on the front page. Champions show their mettle to survive stern Waterford test. As I say, Ciarán and Timmy are with us. Lads, how are you getting on?
Good. You?
Good, thanks,
well. Timmy, we might just kick that to you first off. Limerick standing tall last night. They were up against it in the last few minutes with those couple of late Waterford goals, but it does show that perhaps there's still a significant enough gulf between these teams when you consider the players that Limerick were missing and had to do without at the end of the match last night.
It was a tour de force performance by Limerick in reality. I mean, 30 points, if you think about 30 scores, there's a lot of scores to get in a GM match, in a hurling match. And, I just thought throughout the game they were comfortable, they were in control. The late goals, obviously, the 2 goals bring Waterford right back into it. But they responded, and that's what champions do when they're under pressure. They had injury issues coming into the game, they had injury issues in the game. But champions have a way of responding when it gets tough. And right now, they're the team to beat. There is no doubts in that Limerick are the team to beat. It won't be a foregone conclusion. They'll be hard to beat, but I think that Galway and Kilkenny, on the other side of it, are potential challenges for them that they could succumb to on any given day. But I just thought last night that the gulf between Limerick and Waterford was evident right throughout the game until those 2 last goals, and their response to the 2 goals again highlighted the gulf. Waterford have had a great league campaign. Got a win over Tip last week and dug deep for that. But yesterday was a big test, and they came up short in reality. Where Limerick, despite all the challenges, were very impressive.
And they often say that the losers learn the most in these sorts of encounters, but Limerick learned a hell of a lot about themselves yesterday, it seemed, because they were pushed into that position. That early Ciarán Lynch injury is not what John Kiley would have wanted. He could have planned for life without Kyle Hayes yesterday, but he wouldn't have been planning for a life without Ciarán Lynch. And turns out Colin O'Neill is a bit of a baller himself, and they've got depth in the best hurling county in Ireland at the moment.
And I've always believed you learn from both victories and defeats. One of the dangers for coaches and managers is to ignore what has happened in a victory. So Limerick seem to have that, that mindset that they learn whether they win a game or lose a game in that sense. So I think Limerick will take a lot from yesterday. I think they will realise, that they still need to get goals. Goals do, and they've shown us, like last year in the All-Ireland final against Mike County Cork, their ability to get goals. But what was really impressive last night, without any goal, they still won the game, comfortably without the 2 goals. But throughout, they were comfortable, I felt, right through. So they'll have learned a lot. Waterford will have learned a lot. But I think that Limerick are the standout team right now. And you think about the disastrous league campaign they had on, and yet, 2 games into the championship, and they've blown away the 2 big rivals, that people were talking of. Cork, they blew away last week, and Waterford last night.
But what's the wound licking been like in Cork over the last week?
Well, I think in Cork, I felt last year, I really felt last year in the final we could have won it. But what we didn't do, and we didn't do it last Sunday again, we've got to deal with their aggression, and then we can beat them with our skill. We've got to use these that we're good at. We're quick, we're pacey, so we got to use the pitch. We got to make the pitch as big as possible for us to compete, with the likes of Limerick, who are physically bigger than us. But if you make the pitch smaller, then you play into the hands of the more physical teams. And I just think that Cork will have to learn to deal with the aggression. And when I mean deal with it, I don't mean react to it. I don't mean get involved in it. I just mean be man enough to take it and then create the space to have a chance to win the game. So the feeling in Cork this week was one of disappointment, real disappointment. I mean, there's 2 big defeats now, Waterford from the league final and Limerick obviously in the championship, and Cork have a long way to go to recover. Long way to go now to recover.
They certainly do. Week off this week. We'll come back to the GAA in a little while. There's some great writing across the papers, but we do need to move on to Manchester United, because it does seem like the other big story when you look through the back pages. United's dressing room is a disaster, as I've just mentioned, is the headline on the Sunday Independent. What's really interesting, Ciarán, is just the level of soap opera that even yesterday in isolation gave us. So people in this part of the world wouldn't have been watching Paul Scholes on DAZN, but he was working as a pundit for DAZN yesterday, and he says it is an absolute mess. I had a quick chat with Jesse the other day, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying that the dressing room is just a disaster. This was put to Ralph Rangnick afterwards, and he says, I think the whole group gets on reasonable with each other. I'm not daring to say they get on well with each other, but I don't say there being an issue with regard to the atmosphere in the dressing room. Then you had McTominay coming out yesterday saying there's a whole load of problems in terms of players, staff, everything higher up. It seems, Ciarán, at this point that every single week is just giving extraordinary new public detail about how the players feel and how the management feel about what's going on at this football club.
Yeah, there's a real atmosphere of just being, just accepting that things are going to go wrong, that there's no way out of it this year. They're very resigned to defeat. They're very resigned to negativity. So much, just even in that, Paul Scholes saying, I had a quick chat with Jesse, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying. I mean, that just baffles me a little bit. I'm not sure if Jesse really wouldn't mind Paul going out and recounting his private conversation to the TV. And then McTominay, as you said there, he says about we have a lot of problems in terms of players, staff, everything higher up. So he's thrown everybody under the bus. And then later on he says, for us, when you get back in the dressing room, it's go home and take a look at yourself in the mirror, which isn't the dressing room, but anyhow. For us, self-belief, lack of confidence, you can see it all in the last 2 months, which has been coming. We had a half-decent game today, but even then it is the belief. It's just not there at the minute. And then Raghallaigh comes out and says it's not realistic to dream and speak about the top 4. So everything is just pointing downwards. It's all negative. It's all, giving themselves excuses that there's no way out of this. It just cannot get any better. So you'd wonder about Eric Den Haag waking up in Amsterdam this morning and seeing these headlines and hearing, ex-players speaking with current players, coaches speaking out the way they are. I mean, it's probably unlikely that they'll get to the top 4, but I mean, has anybody looked at has Raghallaigh looked at the last few games? Nobody wants to finish in 4th place, it seems. Arsenal all over the place, United, Spurs drawing with Brentford. It's just unlikely to see, it's unusual to see a coach come out and not say, look, we'll leave it until it's mathematically impossible. We have 4 or 5 games. The other guys are slipping up. It can go anywhere. They're 6 points behind. But it's not impossible. But again, it's just the negativity, and they're all just resigned to that fact. And I think I was chatting to Timmy just a little bit before we come on. Timmy's a Chelsea fan, knows about the cycles that clubs go through. I'm a Celtic fan. I've seen ups and downs in the lifetime of being a supporter, and this Man United thing. I mean, it's all in the shadow of Ferguson, and it's almost like that entitlement that some of the fans and the followers see, and especially the players who played under Ferguson are really struggling to come to terms with seeing this club in the context they now exist. You know, Roy Keane says this is Man United, and like there's a lot of talk of this is Man United and this should be this and the player should be that, and that's not a Man United player. But what is that? Like every club has to reallocate their beliefs when things change, and United have been, you know, in this a good few years now. And, you know, I think there's a kind of a funny ad sent around on Twitter yesterday. It was some betting company. And it's like a guy who's acting as a counsellor trying to treat guys who were Man United fans in the 90s and trying to get them to deal with this trauma and say, lads, look, we have to stop thinking about Blur and Oasis being number one at the top of the charts. There are different bands there now. And then saying, look, you know, if you have a sign a player who doesn't do well and he's trying to force them to rewire their brains and say, well, actually, it's probably acceptable. We shouldn't be in the top four every season, you know. And that's like what a lot of Man United fans and ex-players need to do and deal with. And there's a lot of analysis through the papers about how that'll happen now going forward. There's a new impressive coach coming through. I think what Ten Hag did, like I think the Ajax performance in the Bernabeu in 2019 was one of the best I've seen, and like full of young players, full of homegrown talent. And if he gets support and the guys at the top in Man United get it together, which seems to be where the biggest problem is, then it'll be interesting to see. But there's no guarantee. Just like Timmy with Chelsea next season, God knows what's going to happen.
You'll have to get a season ticket, Timmy, if you want to get in the door at Stamford Bridge. The situation with the comparison you made with Ferguson and kind of the theme of Alex Ferguson, something that David Walsh explores on page 4 and 5 of the Sunday Times sports section today. He starts by comparing it to Vince Lombardi and the Green Bay Packers, and he says, why should the Packers have gone through their dark age after Lombardi left, and the same thing happened at United after Ferguson called it today? Mostly because the dynasties were built on the vision and drive of one man. They led and the organisation followed. They left and the organisations they left were leaderless. And I do wonder if Manchester United are still married to that idea of the one person vision, that a manager can come in and impose his vision on a team and that will fix everything. That is why they've hopped from manager to manager to manager, and that might give you a little bit of concern that, you know, Ten Hag will be the silver bullet for all of Manchester United's problems, even though you've got someone as intelligent as Ralph Rangnick sitting there every week and saying, guys, this thing is a hell of a lot deeper than just a manager.
I was very surprised by some of the comments after yesterday's game, right? Obviously the Paul Scholes one, you know, and you take Ciarán's point, you have a lot of former players who played in the United golden era of our lifetime, because obviously in the European Cup in 68 they would see it as a golden era, but the 20 years of the Premiership where they dominated the Premiership, you know, the players of that era are looking out at the current crop and saying, you know, they're not doing what we did, they don't have the passion, they don't have the pride, and that says, but for it to come out, like for McCarthy to come out and for, you know, Jesse Lingard to be quoted, you know, internationally, you know, is really unusual in that sense. The biggest thing for me was Raghallaigh saying, we're not going to make the top four. There are 4 games to go. There's 6 points behind, as Ciarán said. But it's not mathematically impossible. I mean, you know, I've never heard a manager who are hanging about something saying, we're out of it. I mean, just, you know, even Kevin Keegan in that infamous TV outburst many years ago, you know, believed that, you know, they still had a chance, that United had to go to Leeds, I think it was, and, you know, and get a result. And, you know, they didn't get it, obviously, at the time, that for Newcastle fans. So I'm really surprised at what's going on in United in the sense of within the dressing room. And, you know, it just seems to be toxic. And, you know, they're not playing for each other. I mean, you know, Paul McGrath on the world, I mean, basically talked about their performance against Liverpool and said, if you had Bruce Robson or Keane, you know, they kick somebody just to, you know, so they're not playing for each other. They don't look united as a group of people. On a good day, it's always easy. I mean, they have a huge amount of talent. They've spent a huge amount of money. So on a good day, United will always blossom because of the talent of the players. But you're not tested until you have tough days. And that, you know, we talked with Limerick earlier on about, you know, it got tough last night and they responded. When it's got tough for United at any point in time this season, when the real pressure came on, they have collapsed. I was saying I use for my clients, my business, under pressure, we do what comes naturally. And this United crop of people naturally fall under pressure. That's just the reality of what this current crop of people have become. And when that happens, they then look for scapegoats. And the comments that are coming out yesterday from McCarthy, from Jesse Lingard, from Paul Scholes, who's not involved, from Raghallaigh, just highlights the fact that they're disjointed. Okay, they're not playing together. They're not playing to the best of their talent individually. The amount of stars getting injured. I mean, Pogba has spent most of the season and, you know, injured. The amount is always an indicator too of, you know, if you contrast, we would say, with City or Liverpool, who are at the top of the tree at the moment, They have very few injuries in that sense. So I just think that it just is a toxic environment. And for Ten Hag coming in, you made a point, Ciarán, about his Barcelona victory that night in the Real Madrid victory, was it?
Yeah.
The Real Madrid victory. And but the culture of football in Ajax is very different than the culture of football in England. Just taking England first of all, okay? And then obviously, even though United, fans might think that they have the same style of football as Ajax have. They don't. Ajax have a very different culture, from underage, bringing out these young players right through to seniors. So when you go from then the commentary said about the toxicity that went down right into the rest of the newspaper, which is all about Ten Hag, and one of his lines he says is that in a piece by Ian Herbert on the Mail on Sunday, "I'll make egos fall into line." I mean, that's a really unusual statement to have to come out before you have the job, okay? Because everybody has egos. It's just how you have to manage them. But I'm not sure falling into line would be the ideal way for me if I was going to coach a new team, to say I'm going to make them fall into line. I might say we have to control our egos and manage our egos. So he's got a big task. And what I don't like for him is they're talking about giving him a long time. United fans want success. They want to recover. So, nobody's got a long time since Fergie has went. And, it's hard to see if United don't have the success, okay, in a medium period of time, that Ten Hag will once suffer the same fate that the last 5 or 6 guys think that's something.
And that is the constant contradiction that's always existed post-Ferguson. The constant stat that it's been 7 years between Alex Ferguson taking over the reins and actually getting his first trophy and getting things up and running at Manchester United. And because of the shadow that he's left at the club, in a positive sense, obviously, that other managers just simply will not get the time that he got. Ciarán, there's been a couple of other interesting football nuggets, especially in the Sunday Times this morning.
Yeah, I presume you're talking about the Roy Keane one.
Yeah, Roy Keane and also Paul Rowan inside as well.
Oh, sorry, yeah, of course, yeah. So the Roy Keane one stood out to me partly because it's on the front page, and it's unusual to see Roy Keane on the front page without it being accompanied by some sort of a scathing quote that he's sent out. But I'm actually very excited about this one. Personal level, just because I'm a Celtic fan, to see somebody like him maybe coming up at Hibs. I mean, Sean Maloney was in there. He got 120 days. He promised, attractive, inventive football. He was a coach with Belgium, so he pity Sean Maloney, like former Celtic Aston Villa player. He left Belgium in January, February time with a World Cup on the horizon, and he goes there and he's dumped after 120 days. But Roy Keane is a potential successor. So Hibs, which could be interesting, tapping into the Irish history of the club there as well. He's had a couple of kind of false starts in terms of rumours of him being linked with Sunderland and other clubs. And I think he's wonderful on TV. He really is most of the time. Like it's just box office stuff, really. Even on Instagram, the stuff that you'd never thought you'd see Roy Keane doing, he's been excelling at it. But I'd love to see him back in the dugout somewhere, and it would be interesting if it was something like this. It's a bit of a curious one that you could imagine Roy Keane even becoming Hibs manager. I know the owner is very wealthy. They don't spend a lot of money, so it's a bit of a tough one in terms of that. The owner there is a guy called Ron Gordon, and he's a former tech billionaire. Actually worked with Atari, so you can kind of tell his age there. He might fit into the old school with Roy, but he does say we need a manager with some experience. That doesn't need to be somebody who's old with loads of experience, but we need a manager who can lead. And we are still looking to play an innovative, modern and attacking style of play. So I don't quite know if Roy will be the perfect fit there, but it's interesting to see his name back out there eventually. And I don't know, would we all prefer to see him back in the dugout or stay on TV? It's a tough one because he's been so entertaining. I know a lot of websites would like him to stay in the press box. And then inside on the Sunday Times, Paul Rowan, who seems to have a direct line to whoever takes the minutes at FAI meetings, has something that got back to 2018 of an FAI board meeting. And this again shows a little bit more about Roy Keane and questions about how and why he would get a managerial role in the current era. So we know, most of us, I'd imagine, know the story of Stephen Ward, giving a WhatsApp voice message to a friend recounting an incident that happened in the Ireland camp between Roy Keane, Harry Arter and John Walters. They had a bit of a scrap. Ward described how Walters threatened to fight Roy Keane, and had his peace offerings rebuffed, and Arthur walked out of the treatment room at the team hotel after being subjected to a barrage of Keane's trademark invective. That's how Paul Rowan said it. So apparently then this came up at the 2018 FAI board meeting, and there was some fear that this may have led to Declan Rice leaving the Ireland setup, which looks now, and I mean, I'm looking through other pages here, and they're all talking about where Declan Rice might end up this summer. Is it Man United? Is it Chelsea? Is it somewhere else? And, you know, you have to look back and think, I mean, I thought he was nailed on. He played the 3 senior games. We have to look back and see if this is, or if there's any kind of question that this was part of the problem. It's one of the biggest mistakes in the FAI's recent history, because Declan Rice is obviously, imagine he was playing for Ireland now, be an absolute superstar for us. So yeah, the minutes came out then, and John Delaney, who was then the chief executive, told the board that he had a meeting with O'Neill and Keane, and he had delivered the message to resolve the issues and get on with the game. And then when talking to the press, O'Neill should, quote, let them know who the manager is. So there was still a bit of controversy there, and Roy was thinking of going legal on Stephen Ward, which is an interesting tidbit, and Martin told him he's wasting his time. So eventually then in November, another meeting, Delaney said that the board had lost confidence in O'Neill, even though he's the third most successful manager Ireland ever had. And then, yeah, so the board spoke positively of Stephen Ward in all this, but it seems that may have been the straw that broke the camel's back with the FAI. And you'd wonder, with this coming out now again, will it harm Keane? Will other, clubs potentially looking to see? They have their own ways of finding out what goes on in the Ireland camp and whatever else. But it's another thing that just doesn't look well for Keane in the modern era. And you'd wonder if the Hibs owner has looked into this.
Yeah, it definitely feels like that was one of the moments that people will use as a stick to beat Roy Keane with, to suggest that maybe in the modern game his methods aren't suitable, I guess, to use that phrase. But I think, as you say, a lot of websites would be sad if Roy Keane leads the Sky Sports studio. But then on the flip side, there is every single pre-match press conference at Roy Keane, every single post-match press conference at Roy Keane. I think regardless of where Roy Keane is, as long as he doesn't hide in a cave, he will be in the headlines in some shape or form, and he will always be a compelling story. And I think Hibs would be a fascinating one if he went up to Scotland there. We spent a lot of time on the Footballer. That's the Sunday Times if you want to check that out. Paul Rowan with those new details there. We just want to quickly move on to the golf, and for anybody who read the Sunday Independent last week, they'll have read part 1 of Paul Kimmage's interview with Shane Lowry. Part 2 is published this week. It's on page 11, 12, 13 and 14. Offaly star revels in his status amongst golf's elite, but is not losing sight of his career goals. The life of Lowry is the headline on this Kimmage piece. And Timmy, it's a really interesting insight into his mindset in terms of the appreciation of where he has got to in his career, the sort of mentality he had on the final day in Portrush, even the sort of self-belief that he has getting that wild card into the Ryder Cup team last year. There's plenty of nuggets scattered around this piece.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the piece, I must say, and I thought it really delved into Shane Lowry's mindset at different points. Okay, so in the first page of it, they talk about him being in Pebble Beach and in having before the Pebble Beach Pro-Am, he was in the Monterey Peninsula Country Club with Porter Harrington and their 2 caddies, and he sat down after the night and had a menu, sat in the chair, gazed over the links and said, "Jesus lads, where did it all go wrong?" And I just thought that line actually summed up the appreciation that Shane Lowry has for where he has come from to where he actually has got to in that sense. Because it's probably unlikely that most other pros in any sport would say that. We can't say no other sport, but it's very unlikely. And particularly in golf, I thought. So I just thought to myself, here's a guy at that point had won, an Irish Open in Portrush, and still was humble enough to actually, just not take for granted what has happened. So that really impressed me. The other thing that was fascinating was the Scotty Scheffler reference to Scheffler's admittance the night after round 3 of the Masters and the morning of the Masters. That in the morning and the night before he said he was fine, but on the morning he cried. He couldn't stop crying, and his wife basically said, "Look, you're not defined by golf. You're defined by the man you are." In that sense, right? Okay. No, sometimes that's easy to say, because if he went out and lost the lead, there might have been a different view. But she was really, supporting him as best she could in the circumstances. And then Shane Lowry went on to talk about the Portrush situation for him. And He said that he couldn't sleep the night before. He said, I don't think I ate any food for the day. Bo, his caddy, kept saying to me, you must eat, you're going to get sick. You have to do something. He said, I can't, I'm going to get sick. For me, it was all about, what if I don't win? And I thought this was a fascinating part. His quote is saying, what if I don't win? It wasn't what if I do, it was what if I don't. I'm not sure how long it would take me to get over it if I hadn't won that day. And he talked about his coach coming in, Neil Manship, and I've no choice but to win today. So to me, reading that, it was fear was driving, the fear of losing, rather than the performance of performing in that sense. And when I'm coaching teams, I talk about don't be afraid to lose or get preoccupied with winning. Just perform. And if my experience, if you perform to your best, you'll get the result if you're talented enough most of the time. I thought that was fascinating. That really jumped off the page, that he was afraid of not winning. And it was basically, that wasn't what drove him to perform in the day, because if we remember, the day was a very bad day and Tommy Fleetwood kind of gave him a bit of a gap early on. But I thought that was, and then he said, what did he say to you? And he said, I can't remember what Neil Manship said. He says, and what about Wembley? So it just sort of highlighted that here's a guy who comes across as a very humble, decent, ordinary guy who is playing at the highest echelons in professional sport, is earning vast sums of money for his performances on the course and off the course, and yet is a decent guy. And that's what I loved about, what it did on it. It encapsulated, his mindset, appreciating where he's come from Clara. It encapsulated, the openness that he has as a sports person. And then his mindset in the biggest day of his professional career to date in trying to win the Claret job at Fort Rush. And then he talks about his family and he talks a lot about that and his children and stuff. So I loved it. I really loved it because I got the impression it's Shane Lowry. That was to me, this is Shane Lowry. That was the impression I got in reading this, because sometimes you read pieces and you say, is it Shane Lowry or is it a bit of PR spin? I got the impression this was Shane Lowry.
It definitely felt that way, and it's just fascinating, that psychology of being a leader on the final day of a major, and just how it seems like a completely different world to even just being a couple of shots back. Because in part one, he talks about the morning of the Masters this year, watching Burnley against Crystal Palace, I think it was, going over to his dad's house, having a coffee. I could say it's a matter of a difference of a few shots, but I suspect that were he to be in the lead or in Scheffler's position this year, he would have also felt the same sort of nerves, the sense of being able to, within shooting distance of putting on that first ever green jacket. And just because he was the chaser rather than the leader, that psychology seems, anyway, from Scheffler's perspective and from Lowry's perspective, just worlds apart, which is really, really interesting. Ciarán, what stuck out to you from this piece?
I just have a quick question for you lads, actually, because I didn't see the first part of this. Did he talk about how his mental state was going into the fourth round of the Masters? Because I think the first part of this last week talked about that. Did that come up?
There was definitely more chat about the Masters last week than there is this week. That's the whole element of it. And also the situation where he triple bogeys on, what was the hole 14, was it, on the final day of the Masters? Maybe it was a bit earlier than that. Just how that kind of was a complete pressure valve release for him. Yeah. He was like, well, that's it. That's the whole thing screwed up now at this point, and he could play a little bit freer.
Just relaxed.
Exactly, yeah. So that was probably one of the bigger insights we got into the final day of the Masters.
I'm just curious if it actually did change post Port Rush, but looking at that, that bit stood out to me as well as Timmy there. Paulie did ask him, at what stage did it end? At what stage during that final round were you home? And I remember watching it, and the way he came up to 17th, 18th with a big smile on his face, and it was as if he said he spoke to his caddy and said, God, let's just soak this up. This is what we've always dreamed of. And he looked like he really enjoyed it. There was no stress. He played the flop shot like it was just practicing out the back, like Paddy did many years before that. But in this interview, he says not until the very end did he think, I'm home. Maybe it was the 18th fairway. And he said, I'm sure Scotty said the same. It's the best day of your life, but it's the most horrible as well. It's so unenjoyable. It's not even funny. But then when it's over, you look back and think that was amazing. And I think, what Paul does really well here is he's obviously built up these relationships with the golfers, because, golf is an interesting beat to be on. You get to travel around and spend a lot of time in and out of the marquees with the players. And it's kind of a smaller pocket of journalists that travel around the world and travel to the big tournaments, and you get to know the golfers. You might get a bit more access than you do in soccer or rugby these days. I've covered a few tournaments, the Ryder Cup, Irish Opens, and the players will always be brought into the big tent after their round. So it's nearly like you'll speak to them 4, 5, 6 times a week. So this is why you get such great access, especially Paul, having built up these relationships and the chats that you get with Shane. I often found, even just talking to mates or other journalists, talking about him being relatable sometimes feels a bit insulting almost, to say, he's just an ordinary Offaly man, and he's every man, and we can relate to him, he's so ordinary, and sometimes people think that just because he has a bit of weight in him as well. It feels a bit insulting sometimes, but reading through this, it does seem that he is. It just kind of reinforces it almost. It makes me feel that my initial thoughts on who Shane Lowry might be weren't all that far off, and he just does come across as a lad who, like you or me, who maybe dreamt of becoming a professional athlete or sports player, what we'd do if we got to that stage, and he seems to do it. He talks about moving to Jupiter. I had a friend who lived in Jupiter over in Florida in the late 90s, and there were some golfers living nearby, and I thought, God, imagine being a golfer and this is where you go and you all hang out in the same area in a gated community. And he's talking about living there now, and the kid, Ivy, has a little American twang, and he talks about having, the pool out the back and pinching himself and going, geez, how did I end up here? That's just his house. But he's living the life, and he's living in that community, and he goes down to the Bears course in Florida there near West Palm Beach, and he'd see Jack Nicklaus or Gary Player, and then Dustin Johnson turns up. So he's living that life, and it does seem like it's so alien to him in a way because he's so down to earth. But there's another little snippet there about what about your place in history? He was talking about the stature, how stature changed after winning the Open. And Paul says, what about your name on the claret jug? And he goes, yeah, that's pretty cool, to be fair. And to have the actual claret jug in your house, I used to keep it on the island in the kitchen. And Paul says, like Padraig. And he goes, yeah, it nearly hits you in the face when you walk into his house. After a few months, the sense of, oh my God, wears off. But the coolest thing is the look on people's faces that see it for the first time. I've showed it to people that have cried. So he really gives a great relaxed insight into so much here. And there's that little bit about talking about playing with Tiger Woods. He eventually played with Tiger Woods, and it wasn't until 2020 that he did. And of course, Tiger's, so old now. It's a bit like, Anthony Elanga playing with Ronaldo or something in soccer. But he talks with just joy, childish joy, about playing with Tiger and what he learned there. And how we learned from Tiger slipping up in the last round in the Masters. And it's a little unfortunate we didn't have that Disney finish, with Shane coming back to do it at the Masters. But it doesn't look like he's going to be too far away in the future. And it reads very confidently. He seems to be a man comfortable within himself, happy with where things are going, and even hungrier to progress. So it's a great read, and it's a great insight from a player who seems very relaxed within himself and happy to talk.
Very confident, and I think that, as you say, because of the very kind of affable personality that he is. Maybe that's doing him complete injustice. Maybe that's not how you describe him at all. But certainly a very friendly character. You sometimes disassociate that from the real cold-blooded killers that you need to be a top-level competitor, and that's exactly what it is, and what he is. And it comes with, we saw it in terms of the reaction to Bo when he had the wrong club on day 3 of the Masters this year. We see it here in the confidence when he talks about the Ryder Cup. He says, to be honest, I personally thought that no matter who was the captain, that I deserved a pick. And he's annoyed that Padraig Harrington kind of left him wait around long enough on the Sunday evening where he announced his wildcard picks for last year's Ryder Cup. So that definitely jumps off the page.
That bit there, and actually just quickly, without swearing, I love the way, a player or a golfer or any athlete is confident when he drops the F-bomb in an interview. And he says about Padraig, he said, I had to wait around in Wentworth that Sunday evening in case I got told I was being picked. And when Harrington eventually did, he came into the room and Shane said, you effing left me long enough. Which is great, because he's obviously completely confident in himself, and it wasn't sitting there biting his nails or whatever. He was like, yeah, I'm going on this.
He deserved to be there, and he knew it. Yeah,
right, we'll move along. There's too much sport, isn't there?
Well, we'll move on. Just one final thing on this is, it's been very, very interesting, the kind of the stories around Shane Lowry this year. It's obviously been a brilliant couple of weeks, really, when you consider the finish as well at in North Carolina a couple of weeks ago as well. So that's been the golf element. But Shane Lowry was asked quite a bit about the Saudi Arabian golf events over this course of January, wasn't it? And the attempts to sport wash with regards to Saudi Arabia. Obviously, it's come up in Formula 1, it's come up with Newcastle United, and he said obviously there's no hiding from the people writing about this tournament or what they're saying about us going to play. But at the end of the day, for me, I'm not a politician, I'm a professional golfer. I earn a living for myself and my family and try and take care of those, and this is just part of that. I'm happy to go there. I'm happy to earn my living going there and going playing good golf and hopefully win a tournament. So that was what Lowry said in January of this year. You would have liked to have seen Paul Kimmage actually ask Shane Lowry about that, about the reaction to it, because there was a bit of a blowback to it. I'm not sure what the situation would have been, what Lowry would have said, but it's certainly something that I would have kept reading were he to be asked about it.
Yeah, and it's an interesting omission, when you consider the sensational situation with Mickelson, who can't even attend the Masters, about comments he made when you go back in that. And, because he talked about, a lot of stuff over the 2 weeks, but, it just was an omission. Now, whether it was the deliberate omission, whether it was something that was discussed and wasn't put in, we obviously won't know in that sense. But, what I liked about Lowry's answer is, like, when he was asked about it previously, he's a professional. So his job is to earn money. That's what his, pay his sport and earn money, and obviously win along the way if he can. So, he didn't get into the politics, which I thought was the right thing. I mean, for him, he's a player. And if he is invited to play places, but do I see him give up the PGA Tour? No, I don't. I mean, I think that, that's where, like you talk about, Ciarán talked about Jupiter earlier. That's where these guys, see the future of the game. And, it'll be interesting to see what will happen with the tour in Saudi Arabia. But I just think that, for Lowry, his answer was, look, I'm a professional. And we're obviously mixed and gave different answers in that sense. One other thing I thought was interesting, though, and Ciarán touched it in this piece, the final for me piece, was that he said, I learned from Tiger. And I thought it was, even for all of us who play sport or play golf, and, like Tiger had a 10 on the 12th. And birdied 5 of the next 6 holes, and like Lowry said, he didn't give up on any shot. He says, right, okay. He said, I look at this guy who's, in Lowry's opinion, the greatest of all time, and in my opinion, the greatest of all time. And he didn't give up on any shot, even though he had just had, a 10. And if you think of other players, and and many of us would give up after a double bogey or triple bogey, and that's the fact that Lowry was still prepared to learn, even though at that point in time, he was obviously an Open champion. I just thought it was a great sentiment of where he is mentally in the game.
Absolutely. So that's part 2 of the Shane Lowry interview. It's in the Sunday Independent this morning. As you say, Ciarán, there's a ton of other stuff we want to get stuck into. We're going to touch on rugby at the moment. And if you're with us live on our social channels, you can leave a comment, by the way, on YouTube or tweet us at Off The Ball. We are, 9 minutes into the game between England and Ireland in the Six Nations. England leading 10-0. At the moment in that game. It was always going to be of an uphill task today, to say the very least, Ciarán. There's been a couple of really interesting pieces done in the papers this morning, not least by Bernard Jackman in the Sunday Independent and Stephen Jones in the Sunday Times. It's Crow Patrick and flip-flops on a crap day is how Brendan Fanning describes today's fixture, but there's a wider conversation to be had here around Irish women's rugby, obviously, but also when it comes to the importance of the sevens that the IRFU are currently placing on at the moment.
Yeah. It's only 10-0, is it?
Currently.
Yeah. So point per minute, yeah. And there were warnings. I think Brendan Fanning suggested they might surpass 79-0 that England inflicted in 2002 on an Irish side. I don't remember that scoreline, but it's pretty harrowing. And they're on target for that kind of scoreline. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if everybody knows, but the women's team have the 15-player team playing in the Six Nations have been ripped apart by players going on the Sevens tour, and some of their best players basically are off playing the Sevens. It's just a conflict, really, isn't it? It's not really an issue in the men's game because there's such a depth of players, and the Sevens team are seen as a development squad. They're a team in and of themselves, and it's got your Olympic qualification now, so there is some extra funding there as well, and it's seen as something to bring players through. Especially in the backs. We have Robert Ballacoon played through the Sevens. He's come through into the senior level at Ulster and Ireland. Hugo Keane, most notably. I remember going to Monday meetings at Leinster where you get the players and coaches put up in front of you. And when Hugo Keenan would come in, with all respect, we used to think, he's one of the fringe players who will get, those games for Leinster, but won't ever kick on into the Ireland team because he's in the Sevens. And you'd think automatically, perhaps wrongly, or sometimes correctly, that if you're out in the Sevens, you're a good way away from making the senior 15s. But I think he's maybe the exception that proves the rule, really. He's kicked on and made an incredible career for himself at the senior level. It's astonishing, really. But when you have the Six Nations scheduled at the same time as the women's game in the sevens, it's just a big problem, and especially for Ireland, who don't have the depth of talent. And Stephen Jones, to have Stephen Jones talking about Ireland in a slightly negative light is not a surprise in the Sunday Times, but the fact that he's doing about the women's game is interesting. So he spoke up about how, you know, he says that the rugby in Ireland, so he thought, was transformed by the brave actions of members of the women's squad and retired greats. They were so incensed by shocking treatment at the hands of the Irish Rugby Union that they took their complaints to the Irish government. They detailed all the abuses of proper preparation, that some had to change outside by rat-infested dustbins, about the day when all the toilets were locked and so on. They won hands down, set out to start their new life, as impecunious as before perhaps, but no longer treated like stray dogs. Then last week we found out that 7 Irish players, including the whole back three and both centres, would not be playing today against England. They've all opted to play sevens in Canada, or been told to opt by the Irish Rugby Union. Reports differ. So he talks about, you know, sevens, and when he went to Hong Kong as a young journalist, the Hong Kong sevens was it's a bit of a piss up, really. It's like a giant stag party with rugby jerseys thrown in. And he talks about, you know, the whizzing action, run along in front of you. And he says, but the notion that sevens is some kind of valid development vehicle for the top professional ranks, even for international rugby, is ludicrous. Yeah. He says the sevens at the Olympics is clearly massive, and to the credit of World Rugby, they fought to bring it into the Olympic movement, which replaces considerable funding for the sport in countries where Olympics are prioritised above anything else. So, like, he's asking that question, and it seems to be, you know, in Ireland, that we've taken the kind of Kool-Aid and thought, well, you get funding, you get Sport Ireland funding, there's smaller numbers, so it's easier to put teams together. But for Jones, I kind of tend to agree with Jones. I think that, you know, putting that much money and time into the sevens to think that it is the development vehicle for the top professional ranks probably isn't borne out by any great facts. I think the Irish, what's your man's name? David Nucifora kind of came in and said, I think Brennan's mentioned him there, that he sees the sevens as being a really decent bed to develop players in, and maybe it's an easier win for the women's game because we've smaller numbers. You know, myself and Timmy were talking before, like in England, where England and France are running away with the Six Nations, but there's so many more players. They've got professional leagues. They might have netball and hockey and soccer competing, but like in Ireland, I think the GAA probably snaps up so many young Irish girls who want to play sport, and to get the numbers up for rugby for a sevens and a 15 is just difficult. And we'll probably see in the next hour what that scoreline ends up being. Now, that's a snapshot. Obviously, things will change, but to have them both on at the same time, especially for a country like ours, it's not ideal at all. And I think Stephen Jones questioning that is worth listening to be honest.
That scoreline has gone back to 5-0, by the way. The try was ruled out for England. And Ireland,
we're good. We're grand, so we're grand.
That's it, yeah. And Ireland have also won a scrum penalty as well after 7 minutes with their own put in to the scrum. So I know it's a lot of the backs that are missing today, obviously, for Ireland who are with the sevens. The glamour of bans, suspensions, courtroom rulings on players extends its tentacles into GAA as well, Timmy. Mark O'Shea in the Mail on Sunday today goes with take a wrecking ball to this shambolic process. At least that's what the headline is on his piece today. There's no prizes for guessing what it's about. It's about Armagh appealing to get their players off the leash for today's Ulster Championship game against Donegal. Donegal not appealing, and Donegal not having their players available, and Armagh having all of their players available. A couple of loopholes, a couple of technicalities that Armagh managed to find and identify, and they're at a greater strength now as a result of what's happened. What's your take on this Mark O'Shea piece, Timmy?
Well, if you take it in conjunction with the last piece we were just talking about, the Neil Francis piece, it's actually interesting because he says actually the GAA should adopt a straightforward citing system, which is interesting. First of all, it's a very honest assessment of the fact that there's too many loopholes, right? Now, he did actually say openly and honestly that, you know, he availed of the loophole. You know, I mean, he actually said that he was told by a Tyrone man whose name I can't recall, which I thought was a great way of saying, I can't mention the guy who told me this, but he said that don't mention the word shoulder, stress side to side. So he was sent off against Cork in the Munster semi-final. Mark Shea says, I ran into Cork's Ron O'Brien which was an accidental collision, but he got a red card, which he believed was very harsh. And I remember at the time, I thought it was harsh. I actually didn't, watching it, it was a harsh red card. But he was then obviously appealing it, so he went and got this man from Tyrone, gave me advice, don't say it was a shoulder, because typically you say it was a shoulder charge. So he said side to side, and basically he was, at the first toll booth on the motorway, he described, when the county secretary rang to say it had been clear, then the relief, the elation, etc. So Mark took advantage of the system in that sense, right? And now he's obviously saying that, it's now a shambolic process. So, like what happened with the Armagh situation, I mean, first of all, the Ryan O'Neill one, where the video was sent to the Central Council before the referee had seen it, and that was the technicality. It looks to be very sort of loose in that sense. And then the other three guys, obviously, since in the Armagh. So in any sport, the disciplinary process is very difficult, because once you have a situation where you can appeal something, then you're then bringing in potential QCs, barristers, etc. in that sense. So it's a very difficult situation, and I believe that the GA has, over the last number of years, continued to struggle with this.
Yeah.
Okay. The reality is that if you do something wrong, you should get punished. If it is proven you did something wrong, you should get punished, and it's as simple as that in reality. And what we tend to do is we tend to say in sport, look, it's only sport, it's only GA, or it's only soccer, or it's only rugby, and it's part-time, or it's amateur in the GA sense from that point of view. So we tend to have a very loose opinion on it, in my view. My view was always very simple in sport. You play to the rules, you stretch to the rules as far as they're legally stretched. But if you infringe them, you get penalised. And that's just the reality. So I was surprised when I heard the decision about the Armagh players getting back in. And now they go into the game with their full squad, where, as you said, Owen, Benny Baldwin. So Mark O'Shea, he sets it up nicely with his own story, okay? Because the one thing about his own story, which is different though, he was sent off incorrectly. He didn't deserve a red card. That's an important twist. Like, even though he did say he used the side to side to get off with it, but he was sent off. It was a bit like Tony Davis in the All-Ireland final many years against Derry. He was sent off, for a tackle that he didn't commit. So it was just, like him getting his red card rescinded was the correct decision. I'm not sure on the technicalities of the other ones that's the correct way to go. But look, Armagh won't cater against Donegal. But the J have struggled with this. And now we see from Neil Francis coming, rugby are struggling with it. And I think, like the English system is very interesting, like the soccer. If you get 2 yellow cards in one game, you get a 1 game suspension. If you get a red card, you get 3 games. So there's a definitive penalty.
Yeah.
And there's no ifs or buts, So maybe both sports, GA as we're talking about here, and rugby, should look at, if you get a yellow card, there is a penalty for that in some future game. And if you get a red card, it is defined. So therefore, it won't change the severity of the tackles, but it will mean that the punishment is clear. Yeah. Because I'm against this citing thing, because if you, as Ciarán explained, the citing becomes just, legal hogwash at times in that sense, and some people are supposed to get 6 weeks and get 3 weeks, and 12 weeks get 8 weeks, and some get nothing. So I just believe have a very simple policy, break the rules, these are the penalties, and there's no appeal. These are the penalties.
He does reckon that it's not necessarily going to be an automatic win for Armagh on the day. He mentions that he played poorly after he got off his red card in that Munster final. He mentions 2014 when Lee Keegan got a red card in the drawn semi-final. He didn't play very well in the replay. He mentions Diarmuid Connolly. Everybody remembers him getting off on the Friday night before the Mayo replay in 2015, and that actually you might struggle to remember how well he played in it. So that this can actually really set a player back. It can really distract a player, and I don't know, Rian O'Neill is a player of such quality. Even if he's distracted, he's probably going to kick a fair score tally today anyway. But it will be interesting to see how Armagh actually deal with that sense of being distracted on the disciplinary level over the last little while.
Owen, I have the personal experience of that. So I coached Tralee in the late 90s to win their first ever Super League title, and we then qualified for the national championship playoff at the end. But we were the champions, and then there's a national championship at the end. So we went in as hot favourites, obviously. But the week before, one of our star American players, Ricardo Leonard, got sent off in the game for verbal abuse of the referee. So he was suspended for the championship. And what we did was we appealed it, So we appealed it and we spent the whole afternoon on Saturday in a hotel in Cork appealing this suspension. And, we were playing Saturday night and we won the appeal because, what she reported was we had evidence that wasn't actually what was said. So there was But the problem was, Ricardo was awful on Saturday night. So psychologically, the relief of coming off the appeal just interfered with his performance. It was just, and like Mark O'Shea talks about it here, a number of players in similar situations, have, got off with, with the sentence and have not performed. So that would be interesting to see how the Armagh players, I think they'll perform. I believe they will perform today in that sense. But I have seen it, work against you, when you get the player off, and then, psychologically they can't get themselves to the level that you need to for the game, and we eventually lost that game because of one of those factors.
Just very briefly, lads, just want to touch on a couple of other stories to wrap up on the GAA front. Looking after number 1 is the headline on page 8 and 9 of the Sunday Independent. Tommy Conlon has done a bit of a deep dive into the development of goalkeepers. Yes, it's a subject that's been covered quite a bit this season and over the last little while, but there's new bits and pieces in it. He's spoken to Shane Ciarán. He has spoken to Gary Rogers, of course, a goalkeeping coach now formerly of Dundalk, and a few other people in this piece as well, to give a decent insight to the developments that have been happening in the past, even pre-Cluxton. I'm not sure, do you want to pick this up, Ciarán? What stuck out to you from this piece?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, actually. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I played GAA when I was a young kid, but wouldn't have watched it too much and wouldn't have worked professionally at it. But I remember a couple of friends talking about Stephen Cluxton and how he's changing the game, and I remember thinking cynically, he's a goalkeeper, how's he done that? What are you talking about? And then I got a ticket to an All-Ireland final. I know I shouldn't have been allowed to be there. I took it from somebody more worthy, but I'm sitting behind the goal and I'm watching Cluxton, and it's like he's taking an 8 wedge, an 8 iron out of his golf bag and pinging it out in the wings, and I'm thinking, God, that my mate was actually speaking sense. And this is interesting to read, and it's, for me, again, coming from more of a soccer background, it's interesting in how it's kind of mimicking, or they're both just finding that path as soccer, with the emphasis nowadays on how goalkeepers have to be able to play out from the back, and they're an integral part to an attacking setup. So the attack starts so deep. And I think Tommy does a good job of kind of charting its evolution and getting a few different insights from different coaches, and how it was looked down upon. And again, there's another little element here. He says the downside for Ciarán, that Shane Ciarán of the revolution, is that it's producing goalkeepers who are better footballers than netminders.
Yeah.
The fundamental defensive duties are in danger of being neglected in the rush to find ball-playing custodians. We are seeing, he says, examples of goals being conceded where a good specialist goalkeeper wouldn't allow them to be conceded. And I was thinking of last week of Man City's game against Liverpool, and I often tweet, I'm like, how can you get to be an elite level goalkeeper, professional soccer, and not just do the basics properly? The amount of time they miscontrol it, can't do a short pass, can't pass it out. So sometimes I'm wondering how many goals will that over the next 10 years will be conceded by goalkeepers trying to do stuff they're not really equipped to do. And that's an interesting thing from Ciarán there. And I do wonder if GA is actually better built for this, because, I mean, he does say specialist goalkeepers there, and he says close to 80% of goals a good specialist goalkeeper would have stopped them, is what he saw in the National League. And
that's interesting, isn't it? Like, that really stuck out to me, that he went through 20 goals that were conceded, and he reckons that the quality of goalkeeping is of such a level now that these goals should be being stopped. So it's that's obviously a subjective opinion, but at the same time, it's this balance that we now have to weigh up between, Rory Beggan coming up to pitch against Tyrone in the first round of the National League this year and kicking a point from play. I think it was his first score from play for Monaghan, and Rory Beggan getting chipped by Kerry players in the game in Inniskeen 4, 5, 6 weeks later. And it's a fascinating one. I'm not convinced that we have an answer to this, but what's
short term, isn't it?
Yeah,
we only have a small kind of sample, but the 20 goals and 80%, I was like, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah,
because you think, Gaelic, anybody can drop back into the nets and use their hand, so why would it be that bad? But it is about positioning, I suppose. It's about expecting, certain moves from attackers. So I'd love to see that, actually. I'd love to see more of analysis on that, and how 80%, so what's that, 16 goals should have been saved. It is an interesting stat, but it's good. It's a good insight into part of a wider trend.
It's mad. Tommy Conlon mentions in 2010 the GA changed the rules so that all kickouts be taken from the 13-metre line. That was not a massive deal, but it was a very noticeable development at the time. Then also the kicking tee was brought in 2005, and then also you've got the advent of maybe more withdrawn defences as well. So this isn't just some random thing that has kind of appeared out of nowhere, Timmy. There has been a number of different steps to this phase where we're looking at these goalkeepers as massive parts of the attack now.
Absolutely, and the kicking tee is a big change. The fact that you can tee the ball up and it gives you elevation, it gives you the chance to ping the ball, which is something that would be more a soccer description in that sense. I've coached Bridges, actually, Shane Curran's club, and Shane was the goalkeeper when Bridges won the All-Ireland. I coached him a couple of years ago to win the senior county in Roscommon, and James Martin was an excellent goalkeeper. And I would say to him, there was 3 things a goalkeeper has to have. In the modern game, he has to be able to kick the ball. Okay, so you can, because everything happens now. Kickouts are very important in where they go in that sense. Secondly, he must be able to catch the high ball. And that's one of these that, not every goalkeeper can actually do. And the third thing is, there must be good shot stoppers. I mean, they must be able to stop the shot. If you have those 3 things, you can be a really top-class goalkeeper. So I do believe that the tee was a big change. The 30 metres that was not as big. I thought the fact that the kicking tee. But what I do find interesting, though, is if you have your keeper coming out, and sorting out and trying to score from play, well, then you have to make sure you have a system where somebody goes back and goal, because that is that, you have to have a system to revert in that sense. But the evolution of goalkeepers in GA, and I thought Tommy, captured it here in that sense, was not just with Cluxton. I think that was one of the big things I took out from this. It was pre-Cluxton. Cluxton brought it to another level. You got to give Cluxton credit. He brought it to the next level. But like Shane Curran, we're doing some of this stuff before that in that sense. I think the evolution of goalkeepers in soccer are similar. I mean, like Chelsea have had, my team have had nightmares in the last couple of weeks by Mendy not being able to kick the ball, or pass the ball, and we go to the Champions League because of it and lose a couple of league games. So it is now a requirement that goalkeepers can kick the ball. And in a GA sense, because the importance of the kickouts have become so important, because withdrawn defences or defences that push up, full on the kickouts, you really have to have somebody who can kick the ball. And that's the big change, because, Shane Curran talked about, at times where there was goalkeepers, couldn't kick the ball. The full back had to kick it out for him in olden days. So it has become a big thing now. And I think that ultimately, though, they're a goalkeeper. We got to keep that. And he used the word specialist. They must be able to stop shots and catch a high ball. That's their fundamental thing. And now the evolution of GA for them is that they must be able to kick the ball as well and kick it accurately and precisely. And that's a big development, I think, for many goalkeepers. Absolutely.
So that's Tommy Conlon's piece in the Sunday Independent today. We are almost out of time, but we did want to just mention quickly some of the boxing pieces that are in the papers today. Shane McGrath has written about Daniel Kinahan and his connection with the world of boxing. Obviously, Tyson Fury was in action last night. He got the win against Dillian White. That's on page 62 of the Mail. There's kind of like a mention of, the shadow that the Kinahan involvement will have on sport, not just in boxing as a global sport, but especially in Ireland for obvious reasons. I mean, we've got a massive Katie Taylor fight next week in the Garden, which is going to be a fantastic occasion, but because of certain links between boxing and organised crime in Ireland, there may well be a full professional career of one of Ireland's greatest sports people who may never have a professional fight in Ireland as a result of that, which is kind of a really terrible consequence, one of a number of terrible consequences of it. And it is that fight that's covered in quite a few of the papers as well. Mick Foley's writing about it in the Sunday Times. Mark Gallagher's done a 2-page spread in the Mail on it as well. The story of Amanda Serrano is fascinating. The Jake Paul element is fascinating. Ciarán, you might just wrap this up very briefly for us. What's the most interesting thing that you picked up from the reading about next week's fight?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't judge most interesting or otherwise. I've only read a couple of them, but I did like Mick Foley's piece where he kind of broke it down into 10 rounds, the progression of women's boxing allied with Katie Taylor's career there and how it's kind of culminated in this. And he does a lot of interesting bits, starting off from the famous kind of text from Katie Taylor to Eddie Hearn, where she said, "Hi Eddie, hope you don't mind me reaching out like this, out of the blue," when she was kind of looking for a professional contract. Up to now, now Katie Taylor's asking him, a couple of years back, should I be getting more money? And he says, now we've reached that point. Katie's making a lot more money than a lot of male world champions. It's still not where it should be, but I'll get there. And now she and Serrano are going to be making, 7-figure sums for this. I kind of like reading about it from that side a week out, but then it's also interesting to read some of the elements. I think in the Mail there, some of the pros are tipping Serrano, and it's nice to actually just talk about it as the contest in itself, rather than having to put it in the context of, what Katie is carrying on her shoulder for all the females out there in sport. It's nice to just think of it as a contest at the top level. And I'm a little bit worried that this might be a step too far for her. I don't know how you guys feel, if she's favourite or otherwise. It's good to have Irish boxing in the headlines in a positive way. I think it'll be the perfect antidote to everything else that we've been hearing about on the male side of things. So it is a wholesome story there for next week, and to have a huge crowd. And I don't know what time it'll be on, but I think a lot of Ireland will be staying up, just like they might do for a Conor McGregor fight or a Steve Collins fight back in the day. But yeah, Serrano's power, her strength, allied with Katie Taylor having a few close fights in the last few. It's I don't know if it'll have the Disneyland ending that it might otherwise have had.
Yeah, one way or another, Timmy, it is just this fascinating battle between two fighters at the very top of their game. And Mark Gallagher in that piece says, rarer to have the two top pound-for-pound boxers on the planet inside the same ring. It hasn't happened in men's boxing, he says, since 2008 when Manny Pacquiao clashed with Miguel Cotto. Like, that is the other element of boxing, other than some of the murky links, is just the really annoying politics that prevents fans from getting the best fights out there. Hasn't stopped this happening in the women's game, thankfully, on this occasion.
No, and it's a huge fight. I mean, it's the ultimate for both of them, really. When you think of both of their careers and where they've both come from, it actually is the ultimate. And, you know, I would assume if you're a boxer, Madison Square Garden is the place you want to head to. I would assume that, you know, if you think of all the greats, you know, of the boxing world, that was they all talk about Madison Square Garden as being the special place, okay? And, you know, so the fact that they are now going to be headlining, you know, in Madison Square Gardens next Saturday night is a dream come true for both of them. Obviously, the winner takes all, and that's what this is about. I hope it's not a step too far for Katie Taylor. I think that, you know, it would be, you know, Ciarán describes it the Disneyland finish. It would be a brilliant finish to, you know, put her final stamp on what has been an incredible career, you know, to date in that sense. I don't believe it'd be our last fight, but I do believe that, you know, if she can win this, she might have a few more just to get paydays. But this, you know, this is really the biggest test she's probably ever had to face. But then it's the biggest test Serrano's ever had to face. So, you know, it is really, you know, the two best pound-for-pound boxers, you know, in the planet at the moment. They're coming together in the biggest boxing arena. And it's just something that, you know, I look forward to seeing and hopefully getting the right results, which is a victory for Katie.
Yeah, it's going to be a great occasion next Saturday. We'll have plenty of build-up on off the ball as well over the course of the week, looking ahead to that huge fight. You've been listening to or watching the Sunday papers over the course of the last hour. Timmy McCarthy and Ciarán Raghallaigh have been with me. Lads, thanks a million. Appreciate it.
Good to see you. See you, Ciarán.
The Sunday papers on Off the Ball.